Welcome to the most popular talk radio station in the country, because we are on a roll here, Steve, and we wanted to talk to you this morning because you are someone who understands what it is that's going on politically around the world. You're watching this impeachment process in Washington. I watched it yesterday afternoon, kind of open-mouthed, really, with some of the things that were being said, because there's so many different views on what is happening.
Well, it's actually quite stunning. What we did here, my colleagues and I, particularly people that were involved in Brexit, Raheem Kassam and Jason Miller, who is the chief communications strategist for the 2016. We've actually set up a war room about 4 weeks ago. We have a war room with polling, surrogates, opposition research, rapid response, and we have a daily podcast radio show that's now being picked up nationwide throughout the country. So we follow this 24 hours a day and actually are there to support President Trump in his efforts to avoid impeachment.
The thing that seems to be so baffling for us over here watching it is that the Republicans are completely dismissing it out of hand. Even the Republicans in the House, they're just saying this is a star chamber. The witnesses were being kind of cajoled by the Republican nominee. And then, of course, you get Adam Schiff, who's talking about terrible crimes being committed by the president, something that has to be dealt with. I mean, what's the truth of all of this?
Well, it's pretty stunning yesterday. They had the opening salvo with Ambassador Taylor and Assistant Secretary Kent. And if you look at it objectively, we watched, I think 8 hours of it and had rapid response going. It just seems to be a difference in policy. I mean, this is the difference this is really driven by Brussels and the EU. This is an entire policy over the Ukraine, really going back to 2013, 2014. It's just a difference in policy. I mean, President Trump is a strong believer in America first, which is you want to have allies, you want to have people involved in these situations versus the kind of John McCain, Barack Obama, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton policy that was you want to force Ukraine into the EU and think about bringing them into NATO. What President Trump did here, and if you look at the logic that's presented by the Republicans, is pretty straightforward. He wanted to make sure that American money was not going into a corrupt situation, and also to make sure that allies, particularly Germany and France and others, were going to put some money into the till here. And so it's pretty straightforward. The Democrats have really weaponized this and tried to criminalize it. They have the votes. I mean, this is the thing about our system over here in the House. Elections have consequences. They have the votes to actually impeach him. I mean, we've started a formal process. The reason, Mike, we set this war room up, we didn't believe the MAGA base. We didn't believe President Trump's base and the establishment Republicans were taking this seriously enough. Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff are driving a process, which I think all the witnesses will all be called by next week. And they will vote to actually bring 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump sometime in mid to late December and vote to impeach him.
But in terms of the actual evidence against him, it appears to be very much third-hand. It appears to be from whistleblowers who are not being named. And one of the things that astonished me yesterday was the kind of very throwaway comment that was made that President Putin was actually not willing to accept Ukraine being adopted by the European Union, putting the European Union right at the centre of this. And nobody's really picking up on that in the States.
This is the central part of it. I mean, this is why we hope, and our logic here at War Room Impeachment, which is this podcast and radio show, is to drive the message. We're finally going to have a debate on America First national security policy, which does not mean America as an isolationist country. What it means is that we want allies where it's in the vital national security interest of the United States, for instance, in NATO or the Persian Gulf or the South China Sea or up in the Northwest Pacific. We're going to have allies. We're not an imperial power. And that's one of the things that the permanent political class of both the Republicans and the Democrats have kind of turned America into this imperial power where we have protectorates all over the world. We have a $1 trillion defense budget, and the deplorables. My daughter's a West Point grad. She served in Iraq. I'm a naval officer that served in the Pacific and the Persian Gulf. The deplorable sons and daughters are the ones in the 38th parallel in Korea. They're on the ships in the South China Sea. They're walking, on patrol in the Hindu Kush and in Eastern Europe. And so what we want is allies. And that's what President Trump's trying to drive for. That's the basis of what this argument's about. I think yesterday, the stunning thing, Mike, if you watch it all day, the media is going crazy on this bombshell that was revealed. This was a phone call from a restaurant that had never been brought up before. I mean, it kind of beggars belief that a phone call that, one ambassador heard by a staffer, that they heard President Trump talking about this in a crowded restaurant, would now be the big reveal after they've gone through weeks and weeks and weeks of this star chamber audition process in secret in a secure classified space below our Capitol, that would come up yesterday. And the mainstream media would treat this as some big reveal when the individual is not even going to be brought in to be deposed until sometime later. It shows you that Democrats will change any rule. They'll use the opposition party media to kind of drive any narrative on President Trump. So this is going to come down to power politics. This is going to come down to who actually has the votes in the House of Representatives. And right now, the Democrats do have the majority.
And is this a kind of establishment revenge on Donald Trump? Because he and you and the team together in the White House basically put your finger on what was wrong with American foreign policy, that the people of the United States of America didn't want it to be. They didn't want boots on the ground in Afghanistan. They didn't want more boys and girls coming home in body bags. They actually wanted the questions asked that Donald Trump asked, which was, what is the point of being in Afghanistan? And so now that whole Barack Obama and Bill Clinton kind of narrative, if you like, had changed forever.
Mike, it's even deeper than that. This is about managed decline, and this is why Brexit in 2016 are inextricably linked. You know, we covered Brexit. You know, I set up Breitbart London, covered it extensively. In fact, Raheem Kassam, who is now one of our leaders here in the war room following this in the United States, was actually my managing editor at Breitbart time. He had been a right-hand man of Nigel Farage. We had followed this kind of populist revolt in the United Kingdom for years. It really was set the precedent for President Trump, and that's all we knew when Brexit happened, that you really had this populist momentum in the United States that could win there. So Brexit in 2016 have always been inextricably linked, and they've moved kind of in the same pattern. You know, it shouldn't be lost on your audience that on Halloween, 3 years after you guys voted for it, on the same day that Nancy Pelosi brought the formal charges for the formal inquiry into Trump's impeachment, was the day that you did not leave the European Union and essentially new elections were called. These two things are about managed decline. And you can see right now it's very ironic that you're going to have a national election on the 12th of December, which will be within a few days of when they bring the formal charges against President Trump and the Democratic House tries to vote it. So these two efforts, and this is the established order, and it's joint party. You can see in the United Kingdom where some of the more traditional Tory parties kind of sided with, we don't want to leave Europe. That's what's happened in the United States. A lot of this has been the foreign policy of the permanent political class in the United States, whether they were Republican or Democrat, normally driven by the needs of the City of London or Wall Street and the global corporatists. And so that's why this is a battle that I think is a joint battle, and you kind of see parallels in it.
And as if by magic, Hillary Clinton showed up in London promoting a new book about powerful women, which bizarrely didn't include Margaret Thatcher. And she's been telling everyone, well, you know what? There's still time to save the relationship with the European Union. Donald Tusk comes out this morning and says, you know, there's still time to stop Brexit. There are still people who are wanting this not to happen.
If you think, and I said this back in 2016, if people in the United Kingdom and people in the United States, if the deplorables think that just winning one election, they're going to sit there and say, what a fantastic idea, we're just going to toss you the keys and go for it, you're sadly mistaken. This is going to be a long-term process. It took us many, many, many decades to get in this situation, and it's going to take us many decades to get out. It's not going to be any one election. You're going to have to put your shoulder to the wheel. You're going to have to work, and you're going to have to mobilize. I mean, look, we won in 2016 in the United States essentially by 79,000 votes in 5 counties and 3 states. Okay, we lost the midterm elections in 2018, and that's why they're impeaching Donald Trump, because elections have consequences. We have to mobilize people for this impeachment effort right now to make sure President Trump is not removed from office. In addition, then we have to take that momentum and win in 2020, just like in the United Kingdom, you're going to have to win on December 12th. This is, every time I give a talk to the deplorables, it's that, hey, the Hillary Clintons of the world have been in power for decades, and they're not going to give it up. I mean, she is now thinking, the reason she's in the United Kingdom on this book tour is she's now trying to generate interest among her donors for her to actually enter the presidential race after Mike Bloomberg entered last week to really run against President Trump.
Right, it's a fascinating situation. What do you make of Nigel Farage's campaign so far? What do you make of the deal? He called it a unilateral deal that he did with Boris Johnson to stand down some Brexit candidates in order to help the Tories win.
Well, I think people have to really look at what the deal is and what you really want to try to accomplish in leaving the European Union. I think what Nigel, at least the math I look at, you're talking about a potential 100-seat majority that could really give the Tories in some sort of combination of some of the other smaller parties like Brexit and DUP, a real governing majority, not just to leave the European Union, but to deal with immigration and to deal with a whole host of issues to really revitalize the economy and to really take the United Kingdom to the next level, which I think is all out there in front of it. It seems to me when you look at it, anytime you can get that type of majority, particularly in today's politics, where you really need to mobilize, and it always helps to have a majority. If you just look at the math, and I think what I've seen is Nigel's talking about a 40-seat, they would contest 40 seats in these labor districts, that maybe the Tories couldn't be too competitive. It has a certain internal logic to it. Now, obviously, when you have these different parties, they have people inside the parties that are sometimes more loyal to the party than to the overall what we're trying to accomplish. I know today, I guess it's 4 o'clock in London is the deadline, and hopefully, you have leaders like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage who are very sophisticated, very savvy about this. Hopefully this thing will get worked out today.
And what about Jeremy Corbyn's role in all of this? Because he's not really an establishment figure. Many people in the Labour Party say that they would prefer to have a different leader, but his followers are very much like the kind of followers you like. They're the kind of people who are quite driven by the ideology, driven by what he wants to do to change Britain.
Well, listen, there's two, populism, and you see this in the United States in the campaign that looks like it's evolving in 2020. Populism is here when you look in continental Europe, or you look in South America, you look in the United States. But it's a difference between populism on the right and populism on the left. Remember, one of the cornerstones of Trump's populist movement is what we call deconstruction of the administrative state. We're trying to get the state out of people's lives. Right? It should be there for trade deals. It should be there for the necessities of government. It should be there to try to make things better. But this overweening nanny state is what holds back the entrepreneurial spirit and what holds back the potential to really have growth and to spread prosperity down to middle class and working class people, which is so essential. On the left, you see this whether it's in Bernie Sanders or now Elizabeth Warren and Jeremy Corbyn. It's just more state intervention. And look, I come from a working class family. In the United States, my dad was basically with the phone company for 50 years. And, we were Democrats for many, many decades. In fact, the vast majority of my family are kind of Irish Catholic working class Democrats. But we're a big believer in that, get the state out of the way so the entrepreneurial spirit can be there and try to drive growth. So people like Corbyn, I equate to almost a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. The thing I think is dangerous is that you've seen this kind of what I call cultural Marxism come into the situation, which really I think is very much anti the underlying themes of the Judeo-Christian West and our values. And so that's why these fights now that are between populists are so important for populists on the right to continue to win these elections and continue to mobilize.
Because the language that people use is becoming very important in this country now. People are being criticised for using certain words. If you come from one side of the political spectrum, they like to control what you say. I won't have any of that, but that is a big, big problem now in this country.
Yeah, listen, political correctness is the way they try to limit speech and try to limit debate. Look, I'm a huge believer in democracy. Look, we won in 2016. And I have done nothing but give accolades to the left, who really mobilized and worked like the Tea Party worked in 2010. In 2010, we had the beginnings of this populist revolt by working-class people on the right, where we won 62 seats in the House of Representatives in our Congress, which is the biggest since the Great Depression. The left really did the same effort, although they had the backing of George Soros and Mike Bloomberg. They had more money than we had. But it was about mobilization, going door to door. And in today's digital politics in the United States, still what's most powerful is going to a door, knocking on a door, and talking to people about your candidates. In 2018, the midterms, the left did that. And here's the reason, Mike. They believe something the Republican establishment doesn't believe. They believe that Donald Trump is a transformative figure and a historic president. And they will do anything. They will knock on any door. They will do anything they have to do, work 24 hours a day to remove him from office, because they understand with his work on putting federal judges into the judiciary, in the deconstruction administrative state, that he's going to be in their personal lives 10, 20, 30 years from now. And so they will do anything to try to remove him from office. I don't agree with their ideology, but I admire their work ethic. And that's why I keep telling people on our side, if you want to win, you can't sit there and whine. You can't sit there and say, oh my gosh, you've got to put your shoulder to the wheel. If you put your shoulder to the wheel and you work this every day and dedicate part of your life to this, good things are going to happen. You're going to have victory, but you're going to have to get engaged. You're going to have to get engaged emotionally. and you're going to have to get engaged, not just by writing checks and giving donations. You're going to have to get engaged by your personal time to make sure that you save your country.
I was reading Bob Woodward's book, Fear, which you figure in quite a large part, Steve, and he was saying that basically it was you, more or less in 2016, who convinced Donald Trump to stay in the race after the Access Hollywood tapes came out with that famous phrase that we can't repeat on the radio. But basically, if it wasn't for you, he might not even have continued with the campaign.
Well, look, that was a very dark day, and I take pride in the fact President Trump's a fighter. He would have never quit. But people can't believe the pressure that came from the Republican establishment for him to step down that weekend. And look, he was never going to quit. He's not a quitter. In fact, he's a closer. And that happened, I think, with 3 or 4 weeks to go in the campaign. It got us refocused. He then went on a barnstorming tour in the upper Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, and we turned those Democratic states into Republican victories. You know, Donald Trump is the best politician we've had since Ronald Reagan. And he really brought his message, which is he speaks in a very plain, straightforward vernacular. It's not this political mumbo-jumbo that both Republicans and certainly Democrats have been speaking. And so if you get Trump on a stage and let him make his case directly to the American people, people understood this was about managed decline, and they didn't want to see American decline. They wanted to see America, return America to her former greatness, and that's why they voted for Trump. But there were very dark days, and the Republican establishment, you see this right now, even in this fight, they tolerate Trump. They don't really support him. The established order in the Republican Party have never been a fan of Trump's policies towards China or Trump's policies towards immigration, his efforts to build the wall, and particularly about getting out of these endless foreign wars, not backing out of our alliances, but reinforcing our alliances to be real allies and not to have these countries as protectorates. And this is a huge battle in the United States right now. It's what's driving this impeachment process. And
can he survive this impeachment process? And just on a personal note, Steve, what's your relationship with Donald Trump like now?
Well, I think, look, he said the other day, I'm his number one student, and he loves working with me. So, but I've kept an arm's distance from the White House, and the reason is I want some independence to do this the way I think it has to be done. And I think people will tell you I'm the number one supporter of the president throughout the country. I have this organization that does nothing but push his ideas and his philosophies every day, and it's given us the independence to set this war room up and really galvanize the Trump movement to help support him. He's got a full-time job, as you saw yesterday when he had the president of Turkey at the White House. And so our efforts here is to support the president. But people have to realize this, and this is only now being grasped by his followers here. The way our system works, Nancy Pelosi has the votes to bring 2 articles of impeachment and actually to formally impeach him, not remove him from office, but to actually pass it to the Senate for a trial. And right now, she's on a path to do that. And you saw yesterday, I believe this thing opened as a huge flop to the Democrats. But last night, they're just sitting there and go, we got it. They're going to drive this very quickly to have these hearings in the next 2 or 3 weeks and to then bring charges on him around the same time you will vote in the United Kingdom, around December 12th to 15th, then debate it, and then I think bring 2 articles to vote to impeach him sometime before Christmas, pass that over to the United States Senate for a trial, and that trial will take place in January and maybe I think end right up by the time of the Iowa caucuses to kick off the 2020 year to try to hurt President Trump. They will not remove him from office. What they hope to do is damage him enough that he will lose in 2020. And so this thing's full on. But I got to tell you right now, for people following this in the United Kingdom, this shows you the importance of winning elections. Right now, President Trump, through no facts, is going to get impeached by the Democrats simply for the fact that we lost the 2018 elections in the House of Representatives.
It's going to be an incredible fight. I can see why you're calling your podcast The War Room. One final question, Steve. A lot of my mates in the media are asking me if you're going to buy the Daily Telegraph.
Well, if the Daily Telegraph's actually for sale, people should understand. I think the Daily Telegraph is one of the great untapped brands in the world. It's a fantastic paper. I think it could speak to a global audience of populism and economic nationalism throughout the world in many, many countries. I've had the honor to go around and to work with a lot of these leaders. I think the Telegraph's a brand. The reality is owned by some very sophisticated, smart people, and it's about really what their intents. Because I think the media may be misrepresenting sometimes their actual how eager they are to sell this. But yes, it would be something that I've had a pretty good run in media so far. I've had a lot of media opportunities presented to me that I've turned down. But if the possibility is there, we will certainly take a look at it because it's It's a great untapped brand, not just in the United Kingdom, but throughout the world. That brand, I think, really speaks to conservative values, and there's a burgeoning market of conservative values throughout the world. So if it's a possibility, from my Goldman Sachs and investing days, I've done a lot of work in media, put a lot of money to work in media, and had a pretty good run at it. So we'd love to take a look if it's actually for sale.